I've worked in the cremation room at Oak Ridge for almost 20 years, long enough to know what real fear feels like. And trust me, fear doesn't come from the dead. It comes from the moments when the world goes silent, and you realize you're not as alone as you thought. Most nights, the building is so quiet I can hear the hum of the air filter and the soft ticking of the furnace timer. The stainless steel walls reflect every step I take. Nothing moves unless I move. Nothing breathes unless I breathe. That's what I used to believe. The first time I saw him, an older man, thin, shoulders slumped, I thought he was one of the overnight security guards. He was sitting perfectly still on the metal bench across from the furnace door, hands folded, face turned toward me like he was waiting for instructions. I remember blinking just once because the overhead lights flickered and I assumed it was another loose bulb. But when the lights steadied, he was still there. Only, he wasn't breathing. He vanished the moment I slid the stretcher into the mouth of the furnace, right as the ignition roared to life. I stood frozen, my hand still gripping the steel handle, wondering if exhaustion had finally caught up with me. I told myself it was a hallucination brought on by double shifts and bad sleep. But the second time it wasn't the same man. And the third time it wasn't even the same gender. That's when the pattern became impossible to ignore. They only appear when the body on the stretcher has no next of kin, no family, no friends, no one to stand outside the viewing window and whisper a final goodbye. They show up in the exact same spot on that cold metal bench. They don't speak. They don't blink. They just sit there quietly, watching me as I prepare the fire that will erase the last trace of their existence. I used to think the saddest thing in this job was handling a body no one came to claim. But the truth is far worse. They do come. Just not the way the living do. Oak Ridge Cremation Center isn't the kind of place people notice. It sits behind an abandoned textile mill on the edge of our small North Carolina town, surrounded by cracked pavement and a line of crooked power poles buzzing through the night. By daylight it looks old but harmless. But after sundown, when the last funeral director locks the lobby doors, the building reveals what it really is. A hollow box of steel and shadows, humming with unfinished stories. Inside, the air is always cool and dry. The fluorescent lights flicker just enough to make you question your vision. The hallways are long, narrow, and echo with every small sound. A dropped glove, a rolling stretcher wheel, even your own heartbeat when you're working alone at 2 a.m. The furnace room is the heaviest place of all. A chamber of stainless steel, industrial vents, and a single metal bench facing the retort door. That bench is where they sit. Always there. Always silent. I've walked these floors for nearly half my life. My name is Ethan Ward, 38 years old, former Marine, now lead cremation technician. Most people assume this job hardens you, but it's the opposite. Working here strips you down. Makes you pay attention. Forces you to see the parts of humanity everyone else looks away from. I treat everybody the same way, with care, with respect, and with the small ritual I've repeated for years. I lay my hand on the tag, say their name and whisper, "I'm here with you." Frank, my supervisor, teases me about it. Says I'm too sentimental for a man who burns people for a living. Frank Miller is 57, gruff, practical, the kind of boss who measures everything in minutes and degrees. He calls the unclaimed bodies easy cases. No family means no paperwork, no complaints, no tension in the lobby. Just in and out. Frank doesn't believe the things I've seen, or maybe he doesn't want to. This building has a way of revealing truths only if you're willing to stand in the dark long enough to notice them. Most nights it's just the two of us. But the silence between us is filled with something heavier than air. Because when Frank walks down the hallway, it's quiet. When I walk down the hallway, sometimes it isn't. Other technicians come and go, but none stay long. They always blame the pay, the hours, the smell of chemicals. But deep down, I think they feel the same thing I do, that Oak Ridge holds more than the bodies in its refrigerators. And for the unclaimed dead, it holds their last chance to be seen. I used to think it was my duty to help them pass. Now I think it might be something else entirely. The first time it happened, the night felt ordinary, or at least as ordinary as a night shift in a crematorium can be. Rain tapped lightly on the metal roof, the kind of steady, lonely rhythm that fills the building like a second heartbeat. Frank had already clocked out early, muttering something about paperwork he didn't want to finish here. That meant the last body of the night was mine alone. The man's tag read John Doe or approximate, age 70. No address. No emergency contact. No one to call. Just a faded hospital sheet wrapped around a body that had been found in a low-rent apartment, gone so long that the neighbors complained about the smell before anyone thought to check on him. I wheeled him down the long hallway, the one with the flickering lights that never stay bright for long. As usual, I whispered the same quiet line, "I'm here with you, sir." It felt more like a promise than a ritual that night. Then I turned into the furnace room, and froze. Someone was already sitting on the metal bench. At first glance, he looked like a thin older man, shoulders caved slightly forward, hands resting neatly on his knees as if he'd been waiting patiently for an appointment. His silhouette was solid, too solid to be a shadow. Yet something about him was wrong. The air around him looked dimmer, as though the light didn't know how to land on him. My mouth went dry. I wasn't scared yet, just startled. "Sir?" I called out, instinctively polite. "We're closed to the public right now." He didn't answer. He didn't move. Not even a twitch. I took one slow step forward, pushing the stretcher in front of me. The overhead light flickered. Once, twice. And in that brief stutter of darkness and brightness, I saw his face more clearly. Or rather, I saw the absence of one. His features were there, but blurred, like someone had taken a wet cloth and smeared the details. And then I realized something else. He was wearing the same hospital sheet as the man on my stretcher. My breath caught, sharp and involuntary. When I looked back at the bench, the figure stood up. No sound. No shift of weight. Just upright like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. He took a single step toward me, and vanished the moment my hand touched the furnace door handle. The room went silent. Too silent. I knew then, deep in my bones, that exhaustion couldn't explain what I saw. Because when I slid the stretcher into the retort and the ignition roared to life, the stainless steel reflected something behind me. A faint shadow. Sitting right back on the bench. As if he hadn't left at all. I tried to convince myself the first encounter was a one-off, a trick of bad lighting, fatigue, imagination. I repeated every rational explanation anyone would use to avoid admitting something impossible was happening. But 2 nights later, the second unclaimed body arrived. This one was a woman. Mid-40s, maybe younger, though life had clearly been brutal to her. The tag listed her as Jane Doe, homeless shelter intake. No fingerprints on file. No family inquiries. She died on a bus bench downtown, alone and unnoticed, except by the officer who covered her with his jacket until the coroner arrived. I wheeled her down the corridor and the building felt different. Not colder. Not darker. Just aware, as if every vent, every panel, every steel surface was waiting for something to happen. When I pushed open the furnace room door, my chest tightened. She was already there. Not the woman on the stretcher, the other one. A figure sat on the bench in the exact same position as the first man. Hands on her knees, posture straight, head tilted slightly toward me. Except she wasn't looking at my face. Her blurred gaze aimed lower, at the woman wrapped in the white sheet. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. She was dressed differently than the first apparition. Her outline suggested layered clothing. A worn hoodie, maybe, the edges soft like fabric eroding in fog. And on her left wrist, faint but unmistakable, I could see the shape of a small tattoo, a circle with 3 tiny lines. I had seen that symbol earlier that night. On the real woman's wrist. My legs felt heavy as I moved closer. I didn't speak this time. Something told me words weren't necessary. Instead, I placed my hand on the sheet over her heart and whispered the name she didn't get in life. "I'm with you, ma'am. I promise you're not alone." The bench figure lifted her hand, slow, hesitant, and touched her own wrist right over the place where the tattoo should have been. It felt like she was pointing at it, urging me to notice, to acknowledge that it mattered. Then the temperature dropped. Not dramatically, just enough for my breath to cloud faintly in the beam of the overhead light. The furnace hum faltered, stuttered, then died completely. The machine had shut itself off. A red fault light blinked on the control panel. I'd never seen that happen before. The room tightened around me. The silence was thick, expectant. The apparition on the bench didn't vanish this time. She leaned forward as if bracing herself for something painful. "I know," I whispered. "I see it." And for the first time something in the room eased. Not warmth, not light, just a soft release like tension exhaled. I restarted the furnace manually. When the ignition surged, the bench went empty in an instant, but not the way shadows disappear. It was more deliberate, more intentional, like she chose to go. As the flames roared, the tattoo symbol hovered in my mind. A tiny circle, 3 little lines. A charity logo. A shelter mark. A trace of a life no one bothered to remember. But someone had, after all. She had remembered herself. She just needed someone else to see it too. When I sealed the chamber door, the stainless steel reflected only me, exhausted, shaken, and certain of one thing. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern. And whatever waited behind that bench. It wasn't finished with me yet. I wasn't the only one the building was watching. 2 evenings after the second Jane Doe, Frank almost walked straight into something he shouldn't have. It was close to midnight, the kind of late hour when even the fluorescent lights seemed tired. I was restocking gloves in the prep room when I heard Frank's boots coming down the hall. Slow, irritated, the way he walked when paperwork was giving him hell. Then he stopped. Not gradually. Not hesitantly. He froze mid-step. I stepped out just in time to see him staring at the furnace room doorway, his shoulders pulled tight under his shirt. "You good?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. His eyes were fixed on the metal bench inside the furnace room, the same bench where the apparitions always sat. But tonight the bench looked empty. To me. Frank blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, then muttered, "Thought I saw someone sitting there. Must be the damn lights again." I forced a steady breath. Someone? Like, a visitor? He shook his head, unsettled in a way Frank never allowed himself to be. Nah. Looked like a guy in a hospital gown. Just for a second. My heart clenched. He wasn't supposed to see them. Not him. Not anyone else. Frank sniffed, shrugged it off and kept walking, but his boots hit the floor faster than before, like he wanted distance without admitting it. I stood there alone, staring at the bench. It was empty now, but the air still held the outline of a presence. Faint, electric, lingering like a breath that hadn't fully dispersed. It was the first time I realized the truth. Whatever haunted Oak Ridge wasn't tied to me alone. It was starting to bleed into the world around me. After the second case, I couldn't ignore it anymore. 2 apparitions. 2 unclaimed bodies. 2 impossible moments that echoed each other too perfectly to dismiss. But there was something else. Something I had managed to overlook until it became impossible not to see. The cameras. Oak Ridge's security system is outdated, half the monitors permanently tinted with static, the timestamp frozen on 2 of them since 2019. Most nights, the screens show nothing but empty hallways and the occasional flicker of a motion sensor catching a drifting moth. I never expected them to show anything real. Until they did. It was just past midnight when I reviewed the footage for the second Jane Doe. Not out of protocol but curiosity, maybe even desperation. I thought if I saw nothing, it might give me permission to lie to myself. I clicked through each camera. Hallway A, empty. Loading bay, empty. Furnace room entrance, empty. Then I opened camera 7, the one aimed directly at the metal bench. My breath snagged. The bench was empty but the floor wasn't. A shadow, clear, shaped like a seated woman, stretched across the tiles. Not a smudge. Not a camera glitch. The contours were unmistakable, the posture identical to what I had seen with my own eyes. But there was no one there to cast it. I leaned closer, hands cold against the metal desk. I rewound the footage. At 11 hours 42 minutes and 17 seconds, the shadow flickered, almost as if it shifted its weight. At 11 hours 42 minutes and 18 seconds, something even stranger happened. The shadow of the woman's head turned. Not the shadow of a person, just the shadow itself. It faced the hallway. Then it faced the furnace door. Then, slowly, it faced the camera. I felt the same pressure in my chest as I had the night she touched her wrist. Like the room around me was sealing shut, holding its breath. I clicked to the previous night's footage. The night of the older man. My stomach dropped. His shadow was there too. Same bench. Same posture. Same impossible presence. Two shadows. Two nights. Two spirits no one came to claim. This was no coincidence. This was communication. As I sat alone in that dim security office, the hum of the monitors buzzing around me, a thought formed slowly, like frost crawling across a window. Maybe the dead weren't appearing for me. Maybe they were appearing because of me. And somewhere deep inside Oak Ridge, something whispered back. We're not done. By the time the third unclaimed body arrived, I had stopped pretending this was something I could explain away. The cameras didn't lie. The shadows didn't lie. And the feeling in my chest, that pressure, that coldness, that presence, grew stronger every day, like the building itself was waiting for me to notice something I hadn't yet seen. The third case came in a little after 9 p.m., just after Frank left for the night. A paramedic handed me the paperwork with the kind of tired resignation people use when dealing with tragedies too common to mourn. Another John Doe, she said softly. No ID. Found alone in a motel out by Route 17. But there was something different this time. In the occupation field, someone had scribbled 2 words, U.S. veteran. I stared at the tag longer than I meant to. Maybe because I knew that feeling. Serving, surviving, only to return to a world where people forget your face quicker than your name. Maybe because I could imagine myself on a table like his one day, wheeled through a hallway no one walked for me. I whispered the same promise I always did, I'm here with you. But this time the air felt heavier, almost charged. When I entered the furnace room, I didn't have to look at the bench. I already knew. He was there. Not sitting, not waiting, standing at the far end of the room, facing the wall like a man preparing himself for something irreversible. His form looked more defined than the others, more anchored, as if sorrow weighed him closer to the world. I didn't move at first. He didn't either. Then, slowly he turned toward me. His features were broken, blurred, smeared like wet paint, yet something in the shape of him felt human. Familiar. His posture was rigid, shoulders squared the way soldiers stand when their name is called for the last time. My throat tightened. I know you're here, I whispered. I see you. The lights flickered. The air thinned. The furnace behind me gave a low mechanical groan, not malfunctioning but reacting. And then he spoke. Not loudly. Not angrily. Just brokenly, like the words had been waiting inside him for years with no one to hear them. Don't let me disappear again. The sound wasn't like a voice passing through air. It felt like it came from everywhere, the walls, the vents, the floor beneath my boots. It pressed around me like a plea wrapped in pain. I stumbled back, heart pounding. Disappear? I don't understand. He lifted his hand, slow and deliberate, pointing at the name tag on his chest. The paper trembled from a breeze that wasn't there. I looked down at it, and my stomach twisted. The name reading John Doe wasn't just wrong, it was a placeholder where a real identity once lived. A life erased by circumstance and neglect. You want your name? I asked, barely able to speak. He didn't nod, didn't move. But something in the air shifted, a silent answer, heavy as grief. Suddenly, the furnace roared to life on its own. The ignition flared, flooding the room with orange light. The spirit flinched, stepping back, his outline flickering like static. I won't let that happen, I said. Not to you. The room steadied. The bench creaked, not from weight but from release, as if something had lifted. When I finally slid him into the retort, I didn't feel alone. Not because he remained, but because his plea stayed with me, echoing in the steel walls. Don't let me disappear again. After the flames surged and the chamber sealed, I felt it, the shift, the quiet, the sense that he wasn't stuck anymore. But as I walked out, the hallway lights flickered once, hard enough to cast a new shadow across the floor. One I didn't recognize. A reminder that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After the veteran spoke, nothing inside Oak Ridge felt the same. The air seemed to hold memory. The shadows felt watchful. Even the silence carried weight, like the building itself was trying to tell me something I wasn't yet ready to hear. But one truth was already undeniable. These spirits weren't haunting the crematorium. They were haunting their own absence, the space where their identities should have been. And I couldn't pretend I didn't hear them anymore. During my next shift, instead of heading straight to the furnace room, I walked into the storage office where we kept all unclaimed body records. A metal file cabinet older than me, filled with thin manila folders that hardly weighed anything at all. It felt wrong, almost cruel, how light a person's entire existence became once they had no one left to speak for them. I opened the drawer labeled unclaimed, last 3 years. Hundreds of names, or placeholders. Sometimes John Doe, sometimes unknown male, sometimes nothing but a date and a location. But I began reading each one. Every entry. Every accident report. Every coroner note. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. A pattern? A clue? A reason? All I knew was that the spirits weren't appearing randomly. They came when someone had been forgotten. Truly forgotten, and maybe I was the only person left who could acknowledge their existence in a meaningful way. I found the veteran's file. There was a line written in the margins. Possible military history, dog tags missing, no next of kin listed. I ran my thumb over the indentation of the pen marking, as if expecting it to warm beneath my touch. It didn't. The folder was as cold as the stainless steel doors of the furnace. I kept digging. One woman had once taught kindergarten. Another used to play violin in the park on weekends. One man had been a factory worker for 40 years before the plant shut down. A girl in her 20s had written poetry in the margins of her notebook the night before she died. Lives reduced to details barely bigger than footnotes. And as I read, something settled into my chest, heavy, aching, undeniable. No one dies unclaimed. Not at first. Not when they still exist in someone's memory. But memory fades. Grief fades. People move away, grow apart, lose track, get busy. And slowly, a person becomes invisible long before their heart stops beating. At 3 a.m., I was still reading, surrounded by open folders scattered like broken pieces of stories around me. The fluorescent light above buzzed faintly, flickering in slow, steady pulses. Then I felt it. Not the cold this time. Not the pressure in the air. Something softer. Something like presence. I turned toward the doorway. No figure. No shadow. But I sensed them, more than one, waiting not impatiently but expectantly, as if I had finally stepped onto the right path. Is this what you wanted? I whispered. Is this why you came to me? The room remained quiet. Yet something inside me answered anyway. They didn't want revenge. They didn't want to scare me. They just didn't want to vanish unheard. They wanted their stories seen, even if only by one person. But as I sat there among those folders, pieces of lives scattered like fallen leaves, a realization slowly pressed against my chest, heavier than anything I'd felt since the first apparition appeared. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. They weren't choosing Oak Ridge. They were choosing me. And deep down I knew why. Long before I ever rolled a stretcher through these hallways, I had seen death in a different uniform. Back in the Marines, I held a friend, Corporal Mason Hale, as he bled out in the sand miles from anyone who knew his name. We'd only met 3 months earlier, yet in his last moments, he gripped my hand like I was the only person left in his world. He didn't have family waiting for him at home. No parents. No spouse. Just a sister he barely talked to. When the convoy moved out, I stayed behind an extra minute, long enough to whisper the same line I still whisper today. I'm here with you. Maybe that moment changed something in me. Maybe the dead recognized the guilt I've carried ever since, that I left Mason behind in a place where no one would remember him except me. Or maybe, and this thought chilled me more than the storm ever could, maybe I've been speaking to the dead for much longer than I realized and they've been listening. I thought I chose this job. But sitting there, surrounded by forgotten names, I finally understood. This job chose me. And so did they. I pulled out a fresh notebook from the supply shelf, blank, unlined, untouched. And for the first time I began writing their names. Their memories. Their fragments. Anything I could find. Not as case numbers. Not as bodies. But as people. People who once lived, laughed, struggled, loved, and then slipped out of the world without anyone noticing. But I noticed. And I wasn't letting them disappear again. The fourth unclaimed body arrived on a quiet Wednesday, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel amplified, The creak of a gurney wheel, the hiss of the exit door closing, even my own breathing. I'd been up most of the night writing in the notebook, documenting every life I could piece together from the fragments left behind. I didn't know if it mattered to anyone but me, or to anyone living at least. The new case was young. Too young. Female, approximately 23, the report read. Found near a freeway underpass. No ID. No distinctive belongings. No family coming to identify her. But someone had noticed one detail, a faint pink streak in her hair. Something about that struck me as deeply human, deeply deliberate, an act of identity however small. Not the kind of thing the world should lose track of. I whispered my ritual, "I'm here with you," and began wheeling her toward the furnace room. Halfway down the hallway I felt it. Not cold. Not dread. Attention. The air pressed around me like an unseen gaze. The fluorescent lights flickered in a slow, rhythmic pulse, one I'd come to recognize not as malfunction but presence. I pushed open the furnace room door. She was there. Not the woman on the stretcher, the apparition. She sat on the metal bench, knees together, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her outline was softer than the others, shimmering faintly, like she was being held together by the thinnest threads of memory. But I noticed immediately, her hair blurred but faintly streaked with pink. My heart ached in a way I wasn't prepared for. "You're her?" I whispered. The apparition lifted her head, not fully, not sharply, but enough that I knew she had heard me. And then she raised one trembling hand. Not to point, not to warn, but to show me something. Her fingers unfurled slowly, revealing a small rectangular shape, a movement mimicking someone holding a name tag. But the real young woman's name tag had no name at all. It was blank. Completely blank. "You want your name?" I asked softly. The lights flickered harder, almost insistently. I stepped closer to the stretcher and studied the girl's belongings again. A torn scrap of paper lay under her body bag, barely noticeable. I pulled it out. There was a name. Smudged. Faded. But there. Lena, followed by something illegible. Maybe a last name, maybe a note. I looked back at the apparition. Her form brightened just slightly, like a breath taken after too long underwater. "You're Lena?" I said. "You had a name." The air shifted, warmth, faint but unmistakable, like gratitude. But then something happened that chilled me deeper than anything before. The apparition stood. Not abruptly, not violently, slowly, deliberately. And she walked toward the stretcher. It was the first time one of them had moved like a living person. She reached out her hand and hovered it over her own covered body, touching nothing yet touching everything. The recognition in that gesture shattered something in me. "You want to be seen," I murmured. "You want someone to know you were here." She turned toward me. And then her face, the blurred, smudged outline, shifted ever so slightly as if trying to form an expression. Sadness. Relief. Maybe both. I grabbed a pen and wrote her full first name on the tag. Lena. The moment the ink touched the paper, the lights steadied. The air warmed. The tension lifted like a weight sliding off the room. Lena's spirit stepped back, one step, then another, and her outline thinned, unraveling like threads dissolving into light. She wasn't vanishing in fear. She was leaving. At peace. When the furnace ignited moments later, her presence disappeared entirely, not violently but gently, like the closing of a door no one knew had been open. But not all doors close completely. Because when I turned to leave, the bench creaked again, and in the reflection of the stainless steel door, I saw a new shadow sitting where Lena had been. Waiting. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of understanding. The storm arrived without warning. One moment the sky outside Oak Ridge was only bruised with distant clouds, and the next it split open with a roar so deep it shook the vents along the crematorium ceiling. Rain hammered the metal roof in relentless sheets, each strike loud enough to drown out even the furnace ignition. Thunder rolled through the building, long and low, like a warning rumbling from beneath the earth. Frank had already gone home. He hated driving in weather like this. That left me alone with 4 bodies waiting in cold storage. 3 of them had families scheduled for morning pickups. One didn't. Another unclaimed soul. Another silence waiting to swallow the room whole. The storm intensified as I wheeled the first stretcher into the hallway. The lights flickered violently, so violently that the shadows on the walls jumped like things trying to tear free from the floor. The hum of the fluorescent tubes warped into a low electric drone, almost like breathing. And somewhere behind me, faint but unmistakable, a metallic tap echoed down the hall, as if someone tapped the bench in the furnace room with a single finger. They were already here. I pushed open the furnace room door. My breath stuttered. Not one figure. Not two. 3 shadows sat crowded along the metal bench, each blurred, each distinct in posture, each facing the furnace with a stillness so absolute it didn't feel peaceful. It felt purposeful. Waiting. The thunder outside cracked so loudly the walls vibrated. As the vibration rolled through the room, the shadows flickered, stretching long across the floor like dark water spreading at my feet. "I know you're here," I whispered, though I wasn't sure my voice carried over the storm. "I'll see all of you, I promise." The lights responded first, dimming to a dull, trembling pulse. Then the temperature dropped, every breath turning cold and thin in my throat. I slid the stretcher closer. The shadows straightened. The first anomaly hit the furnace itself. The ignition clicked on without me touching it. The burners roared to life, flames blooming behind the steel door like a sunrise made of fire and grief. The shadows reacted instantly. The one on the far left stood. The one at the center leaned forward. The one at the right turned its head, not toward the furnace but toward me. I stumbled back, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs. "I'm trying," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm doing everything I can." Another thunderclap hit. The lights shut off completely. For a split second, the only thing illuminating the room was the orange glow spilling from the furnace window. And in that fiery reflection, I saw something I will never forget. A tall fourth figure standing behind me. Not on the bench. Not by the furnace. Right behind me, so close I could feel a pressure at my back like someone leaning over my shoulder. I turned slowly. Nothing was there. But the reflection remained. The storm wailed outside, wind screaming along the siding, the building trembling like it was filled with 1,000 unheard voices. I steadied myself against the stretcher and forced the lights back on. When they flickered awake, the bench was empty. But not the room. All 4 shadows. No bodies, no forms, just the outlines of people who once had lives, had arranged themselves around the stretcher, surrounding it in a loose circle as if they were performing a vigil. Or a plea. I swallowed hard, tears stinging my eyes. I had never felt so painfully aware of what it meant to be human, and what it meant to be forgotten. "You're not alone," I whispered. "Not tonight. Not anymore." The furnace groaned low, a sound like steel bending under sorrow. The spirit's shadows rippled in the orange glow, then slowly, so slowly, began to retreat. One toward the bench. One toward the hallway. One dissolving into the corner near the vents. And the fourth, the tall one behind me, lingering the longest, watching. As the storm raged, as thunder rattled the foundation, as the lights dimmed again and the air grew thick with the weight of the unseen, I understood something. They weren't asking for salvation. They weren't trapped. They weren't trying to scare me. They were gathering. Because something bigger was coming. Something they wanted me to see. The storm raged until nearly dawn. Thunder had carved itself into the walls. Rain hammered the roof so hard it felt like the building was breathing under the pressure. By the time the worst of it eased, I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually. The notebook lay open on the counter in the furnace room, pages filled with names and fragments of lives that shouldn't have vanished so easily. 3 shadows lingered faintly in the corners, and the fourth, tallest, most watchful, still waited near the bench like a sentinel. Only one body remained uncremated. An elderly woman. No family. No belongings except a cheap wedding band and a nurse's note that simply read, "She liked humming to herself." Her face was peaceful in a way the world rarely is. And for the first time since all this began, I felt a deep, aching tenderness wash over me. Maybe it was the storm, maybe the sleeplessness, or maybe I'd finally begun to understand what these souls had been trying to tell me all along. I placed my hand gently over her tag. "You're not alone," I whispered. I see you. The air shifted immediately. The tall shadow moved first, stepping away from the bench, drifting toward the stretcher with a heaviness that felt like sorrow. Then the others materialized slowly, forming a half-circle around the elderly woman, their blurred outlines trembling as if caught between a world that forgot them and a world that had just begun to remember. As I wheeled her toward the furnace, something miraculous happened. The shadows didn't stand back. They followed. Not to haunt, not to cling, but to accompany her, like mourners at a funeral she never received. The lights flickered once, but not violently. Gently. Like a heartbeat. The furnace door opened with a soft metallic groan. The ignition hadn't fired yet, but the room warmed, not with heat, but with presence. I paused at the threshold. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of gratitude, full of weight, full of something unspoken yet deeply understood. I pressed my hand to the doorframe and whispered the words I had whispered for everyone before her. I'm here with you. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, the elderly woman's shadow lifted from the floor, faint, delicate, trembling like smoke, and drifted toward the bench where the others stood waiting. They gathered around her. And then, together, they turned toward the furnace. I didn't open it. It opened on its own. A warm, golden glow spilled into the room, not harsh like fire, not sharp like heat. Softer. Almost gentle. The shadows stepped forward. One by one. Including the tall watcher, the first to come, the last to leave. None looked back at me. They didn't need to. And as the furnace light brightened, something astonishing happened. Their forms didn't burn. They dissolved. Like dust caught in sunlight. Like memories being carried somewhere they finally belonged. Like names being spoken in a place that had never forgotten them. When the last shadow faded, the furnace door closed quietly, almost reverently. The room fell still. No flickering lights. No heavy air. No cold breath on the back of my neck. Just peace. The kind of peace that felt earned. I stood alone in the silence for a long time before whispering, "Thank you for letting me see you." And although nothing moved, nothing stirred, nothing shifted, I swear, deep inside Oak Ridge, I felt something answer. Not a voice. Not a presence. Just release. Oak Ridge felt different after that night. Not lighter, not exactly. But calmer, like the building had exhaled after holding its breath for years. The hallways no longer hummed with that low, aching tension. The vents didn't whisper. The lights stayed steady, their flicker finally gone. And the bench, the cold metal bench that had once held the weight of unspoken grief, sat empty every time I passed it. Not abandoned. Not haunted. Just at rest. For weeks I waited for another shadow. Another sign. Another whisper in the dark. But none came. It wasn't that they'd left me. It was that I'd finally heard them. The notebook on my desk is nearly full now. Names, stories, fragments of lives pieced back together from scraps of paperwork and the tiniest hints of who these people once were. I don't know if it brings them peace, or if it was simply what I needed to understand my place in all of this. But I do know this. Nobody is unclaimed. Not really. Not as long as someone remembers them, even if that someone is just a man working alone in a crematorium at 2 a.m. Sometimes, when the wind outside howls just right, I still pause and listen. Not out of fear. Out of respect. I've learned that the dead don't seek vengeance or spectacle. They seek acknowledgement. They seek the dignity they were denied at the end. They seek not to disappear. And I've made them a promise. As long as I walk these halls, as long as my hands open that furnace door, as long as I carry a name in the quiet of my heart, they won't. Frank asked me once why I keep putting a second chair beside the bench. He says it's creepy, says it makes the room look like I'm expecting company. I just smile. Because the truth is, I'm not expecting anything. But I'm ready. But readiness didn't mean peace. Not really. Because 2 weeks after the storm night, something happened that pulled me right back into the truth I thought I had learned to live with. It was close to 3 a.m. and I was in the prep office finishing the last few lines in the notebook. I left it open for a moment as I stepped out to check the cooler. When I returned, the room was silent. Still, unmoved. Except for one thing. The notebook had been closed. Not slammed. Not dropped. Just gently, Closed. I frowned, thinking maybe I'd done it without realizing. But when I opened it again, my blood ran cold. A new name had been written at the bottom of the last page. Not in my handwriting. Not in any handwriting I recognized. Just one short line written in a faint gray stroke. Ethan Ward. The pen I'd been using lay exactly where I left it. Its tip dry. I stared at the name for a long time, unsure whether I should be afraid or honored. Because the truth wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was written down. Not as a threat. Not as a warning. But as a promise. I wasn't outside their world anymore. I was becoming a part of it. And on the rare nights when the light reflects just right on the stainless steel, I swear I see the faint outline of someone sitting there, not wanting anything, not asking anything, just watching. A reminder that if the world ever grows quiet around me, if my name ever fades from memory, I know exactly where I'll be sitting, waiting for someone to see me one last time.